The possibility of activating transformative constitutionalism and rule of law machinery and to ensure accountability, responsiveness, and openness lies largely with the fundamentals that inform how one gets to ascend to the highest position in a political party and, by extension, to the highest offices in the political arms of the state. Who facilitates a politician's upward mobility is a question that must necessarily and seriously exercise our minds. For the biting truth is that there is no free lunch in this world. Private funding of individuals in political parties and of political parties themselves is, in my view, an investment that is expected to yield very handsome returns as soon as beneficiaries thereof rise to positions of sufficient authority to deal out favors and tenders. And this is a well-researched reality by maturer democracies like the USA. Unfortunately, a compromised leader is most likely to compromise others as well, the objective being to disarm and immobilize those who could ordinarily have insisted on constitutionalism, the rule of law, and accountability. And that is how the moral fabric of a constitutional dispensation could be eroded. What follows was an attempt by a lone voice in the wilderness to awaken us all to this potentially devastating possibility, and I quote, "When people or entities other than the then Deputy President's party gave him sponsorship or financial assistance for the purpose of realizing his ultimate political dream, he was, by accepting help or allowing others to accept help on his behalf, exposing himself to a situation involving the risk of conflict. For that sponsorship or financial assistance to help him rise to the highest political office is most likely to induce a favorable disposition towards those who stood by him when help was sorely needed. And that is what the risk of conflict sought to be averted through these legal instruments or the duty to disclose entails. The reality is that private funders do not just thoughtlessly throw their resources around. They do so for a reason and quite strategically. Some pour their resources because of the policies of a particular party or independent candidate, because the policies of a particular party or independent candidate resonates with their wealth outlook or ideology. Others do so, hoping to influence the policy direction of those they support to advance personal and sectional interests. Money is the tool they use to secure special favors or selfishly manipulate those who are required to serve and treat all citizens equally. Unchecked or secret public funding, secret funding from all, including other nations, could undermine the fulfillment of constitutional obligations by political parties or independent candidates so founded, and by extension, our nation's strategic objectives, sovereignty, and ability to secure a rightful place in the family of nations. Our freely elected representatives cannot help build a free society if they are not themselves free of hidden potential bondage or captivation. The commitment to build a united and democratic South Africa and to improve the quality of life of all citizens can only be honored by public office bearers whose character or willpower is unencumbered. In circumstances where ethical leadership, transparency, and accountability are key to the survival or well-being of our democratic order, a state functionary may not permissibly choose a way to obscure an otherwise disclosable benefit by creating or allowing a structure to be created as a repository of a known benefit under the garb of a distinct juristic personality so as to escape or immunize himself or herself from a constitutionally prescribed obligation to be open, accountable, and to disclose. The foundational values of openness and accountability demand that we pierce through the trust veil that is capable of inadvertently or by design frustrating the all-important disclosure in this corruption-infested country. Why would anybody not want to know who is helping them and how reasonably practicable is that anyway? And why would they want to have their benefactors unknown to Parliament or the public? It bears emphasis that the refusal to know in circumstances where there is a duty to know and the consequential failure to disclose is a sure, albeit unintended recipe for corruption under the cover of facilitation of a well-structured mechanism or legal stratagem, again not intended to, but having the inescapable effect of evading accountability, openness, and disclosure. The President, therefore, had the duty to know, if he did not know already, who was funding his campaign, and to disclose that personal benefit compositely as a benefit from the CR17 campaign, as an entity and or more appropriately from each donor with a specified amount. Why? So that Parliament and the public could know who was helping or had helped him to perform better than his competitors and enabled him to become ANC president and a few months later president of the Republic. The possibility of an unhealthy relationship with donors and the risk of conflict between the deputy president's official responsibilities, as he then was, and his private interest as the enabled most senior political party functionary could then be closely watched to check whether the financial support had induced him or repositioned his disposition or heart to the point where his commitment to his constitutional obligations was in any way compromised, or his government's treatment of funders was more favorable than of those who did not fund him or gave less. This is what the foundational values of openness and accountability, as well as the regulatory framework properly understood, seek to address. Had it not been for the whistleblower who shared the emails with the public protector, it would most likely have never been known that the President and his campaign team presented facts known to be incorrect to the public protector. The President and the CR17 team chose to and represented to the public protector that he deliberately kept himself and was intentionally and strategically kept ignorant of the donors and the extent of their contributions to the campaign, as well as the operations of the campaign in relation to those financial contributions. The public protector subsequently got hold of and relied on emails that belie the President and the CR17 campaign manager's shared version of the President's professed ignorance. The President says repeatedly that he was not afforded the opportunity to be heard before the emails were finally relied on, that they were stolen or irregularly obtained from the CR17 campaign computers, and because they constitute improperly obtained evidence, that irregularity alone is sufficient to vitiate the entire report. The President effectively acknowledges the existence and admits the authenticity of the emails. He confirms that there are indeed communications between him and, among others, the CR17 campaign team contained in the computers of the CR17 campaign. He demands more than once that the public protector should explain to him how and from whom she obtained these admittedly truthful but reputationally damaging emails. Not once does he explain why he and his team chose not to tell the truth, but to rather mislead the public protector, as he did. Instead, he says that the emails are in any event irrelevant to the public protector's findings. But that cannot be correct, for not only are the emails relevant, but they also expose the falsehood of the version that the President and the CR17 campaign managers chose to present to the public protector. And it bears repetition that the false version is that there was a deliberate plan to ensure that the President does not get to know who the donors were, how much they donated, and how the financial assistance received for his campaign was being used. The emails squarely belie this assertion. The question that we should then be asking ourselves is, why did the President and his team deliberately convey a falsehood on an issue so crucial and inextricably connected to the constitutional imperative to promote and observe high ethical standards in obedience to the demands of our democratic state's founding values openness, and accountability. He must have known that if the truth evidenced by the emails were to be told, the obligation to disclose the names of the funders and the size of their contributions to the National Assembly, and by extension to the public, would automatically and plainly be triggered. And the public would then have the opportunity to curiously and vigilantly monitor the outward manifestation of his relationship with the sponsors. Because of the gravity of these reflections, it behooves us to be more specific and frontal about the relevant constitutional demands upon the presidency. The president, as a state functionary, is, in terms of Section 239 of the Constitution, an organ of state. And Section 189(3) of the Constitution demands of him, as an organ of state, to uphold and respect the Constitution by assisting the public protector and ensuring the effectiveness of that office. And that office cannot be assisted and its effectiveness ensured when those who are under a constitutional duty to help it choose to mislead it and to fight it to the end for exposing their untruths. What the president self-evidently did was to undermine and frustrate the efforts of that office to fulfill its constitutional obligations by not just withholding the truth, but deliberately asserting the opposite of it. Furthermore, the president is obliged by Section 96(2)(b) of the Constitution to not act in any way that is inconsistent with his office. This section is the constitutional source of the high ethical standards by which the president is supposed to lead this nation, strategically and intentionally giving a false version to the public protector while she is investigating a possible ethical breach falls squarely within the catchment area of this section. Lest we forget, we are not dealing here with an average citizen, but with the bearer of specific and frighteningly weighty constitutional responsibilities, who is expected and required to lead by example and be above reproach. His office demands of him to be the lighthouse, the pathfinder, and the embodiment of and the vessel for the enforcement of high ethical standards, particularly the constitutional values of our democratic state. In this instance, transparency, accountability, and the supremacy of the Constitution. Like all of us, he has rights, but unlike all of us, he does have special obligations, not imposed by the courts, but by the Constitution and legislation. It is the president, the number one or first citizen of the Republic, who we are talking about here. His is a distinctive and supreme office in the land that does not permit the employment of extraordinary technicalities when issues of ethics, transparency, accountability, upholding and respecting the Constitution have to be considered and pronounced upon. It is in this context that one is constrained to keep on saying that technicalities must not be allowed to easily frustrate the fulfillment of core constitutional obligations and the attainment of substantive justice. In conclusion, why does it look like we are failing or unwilling to resolve the all-important Eskom issue? After all, it has been many years since those who were allegedly corrupt and destroying Eskom have been relieved of their duties. The same group that actually ended load shedding at some point. Besides, this is not a new problem, and our future, our economy and credibility as a nation depends on the functionality and efficiency of Eskom. I saw a clip of one of our businessmen complaining about how cheap the public obtains electricity from Eskom and that it made it difficult for the private sector to compete with Eskom. Is that clip real and true, or is it one of those maliciously manufactured campaigns against innocent people? It needs to be looked into, together with the explanatory note that goes with it. It bears emphasis that the resolution of the Eskom problem is long overdue. This is a matter of constitutional office bearers and the state having to own up to their critical obligations, and our curiosity should extend to whether independent power producers are a blessing or a liability, including whether we, the people, are getting value for money from them. It is most devastating to have almost 7,000 of our people killed by criminals in 3 months over so many years. So many women raped, so much fraud and corruption in both the public and the private sector, runaway crime and lawlessness throughout the country, even when it comes to driving. To have our road and railway infrastructure in so deplorable a state, and to have to contend with this educational system that is beginning to look like institutionalized mediocrity. Where is consequence management? Who has been awarded big tenders by state-owned enterprises like Eskom, Transnet, etc.? How much did they pocket? Who do they relate to, or who or what have they funded? And did we get the value for money from their actual or supposed services? What is being done about the toxic material reported by Al Jazeera years back to have been dumped by one of our mining companies in the West Rand, which has had a deleterious effect on the health of children and adults, animals, and vegetation? The engineer interviewed alleged that the affected mining company said that it would be too expensive to remove this hazardous material. Has it since been removed? What about those who have been dumping toxic material in our rivers and ocean? Constitutionalism and the rule of law demands consequence management under these circumstances, considering the provisions of our Constitution and environmental legislation. We have had a glimpse at the possibility of landowners deriving a semblance of benefit from the exploitation of the mineral deposits in their land from the Royal Bafokeng people. The recently renegotiated mining agreement between De Beers and the Botswana government and Uganda and the petroleum industry. Given the state of our economy and the multiplicity of our needs, is there anything stopping us from renegotiating and insisting on beneficiation like other nations? Do industries exploiting the mineral resources in our rural communities honor their disturbingly unfair social responsibility contracts? If so, where? Just how effective are the legal instruments and agencies established to contain the vulnerabilities and compromises that come with private funding? Is it not time that we develop a public funding model that would ensure that government and political parties owe their allegiance to the taxpayer rather than to private funders? Isn't it a price worth paying to avoid a democratic order that potentially, or in reality, produces a government by the rich, a government of the rich, by the rich, and for the rich? Should it matter that no other nation has ever done that? Why should we be copycats? Otherwise, let's consider an altogether different constitutional system, which will truly yield substantive equality, including equality before the law and improve socio-economic conditions, thus doing away with the inhumane habitations like the Guguletus, Manenbergs, Kaelichas, Mitchell's Plains, and Deep Sluots that are seemingly spiraling out of control. President Thabo Mbeki produced a report on the unbelievably large scale of illicit money flows from Africa, which seems to be an existential threat to our economy. Who of the natural or corporate citizens of our country are involved in this, and what is being done to shame and punish them? If we don't know them, why? Who investigated them and when? Why and how did the current state of dysfunctionality get to settle in so comfortably and to the point of being normalized in the overwhelming majority of our municipalities? Where are the ethical leaders to stem this tide when the nation so sorely needs them? I recently heard, as I conclude, the director of the World Health Organization alluding to another COVID-like vaccination program. I also watched a clip of him being asked, I quote, "And you took your first COVID vaccination when?" After stuttering for a while, his response was that he didn't take it out of a sense of solidarity with Africa, because he is an African and most Africans were not vaccinated. So he who was pushing this vaccination agenda so hard against others did not avail himself for it. And I also hope that it is a lie that health professionals here are hard at work in preparation for another vaccination project alluded to by the World Health Organization. If this is true, constitutionalism and the rule of law demands that a state of emergency, which is sourced from the Bill of Rights, be declared, so that our inviolable Section 12 constitutional rights can be respected rather than be taken away by some ministerial regulations. None of us is supposed to be subjected to medical experimentation without his or her informed consent. That is what the Constitution says. Notwithstanding some of the reportedly controversial statements he made, I still find this remark attributed to Elon Musk most thought-provoking. He says, I quote, "Imagine a vaccine so safe that you have to be threatened to take it. For a disease so deadly, you have to be tested to know you have it." It might sound simplistic, considering that as deadly as cancer could be, one often has to be tested to know that you have it. But you are never threatened or rewarded or forced to be tested, not even for HIV and AIDS. The foundational values of accountability, responsiveness, and transparency, which are the essential part of the moral fabric of our democratic dispensation, and are also embedded in constitutionalism and the rule of law, demand that we be not ambushed with some of these medical programs, chiefly promoted by personalities and entities whose genuine commitment to human rights and the alleviation of the suffering of Africans, like in Gugule, Tukaelich, all these squatter camps, and other people in the rest of the third world, is not known. I apologize that I had to rush so much because I have been warned to stick to time. Thank you so much for listening.